This is Breakthrough News, and you are watching The Freedom Side. I am one of your hosts, the only host here today, Eugene Puryear. Rania Khalek, my co-host, is out today, but we will soldier on with her well wishes and do the best we can without her. I know, many of us will be missing her contributions here, but she will be back with us very soon. So welcome to the show, as always, everybody who is out there in viewer land, and there are all sorts of great stories that we have lined up for you here, as we always do, but I will just start by reminding those of you who are watching on YouTube that now would be a great opportunity for you to go ahead and hit the subscribe button, and then once you hit subscribe, there's a little down arrow. You can turn on your notifications, and please do turn on your notifications so that way you will be notified about all the fantastic things coming out from Breakthrough News, which you have indeed subscribed to, including, by the way, Dispatches with Rania Khalek and lots of other great content that we have coming out for you here in the coming days, coming weeks, coming months. Also want to just say to everyone who's watching us on Free Speech TV, don't need you to do anything, just continue watching FSTV, and a big shout out, as always, to the FSTV team for making it possible for us to appear on that platform as well. And I will try to fill in for Rania here and just also remind you all that if you have the means, and hopefully you do, please strongly consider becoming a patron of Breakthrough News. Certainly we need all of your, donations, however large or small. They make a big difference in what we are trying to do. You can go to patreon.com/breakthrough news. That's patreon.com/breakthrough news. And in addition, to help us continue to grow our platform, to cover more, to do more, to really bring you more and of the content that you love, and bring you more content that you will love once you learn about it. This is how we are going to do it, with your support. And shout out to all of our existing patrons. All of your assistance has made a huge difference for us so far. Patreon.com/breakthrough news. You can also get cool things like this mug that we have here, which in and of itself is a great reward, but most importantly, you will keep us going and growing, as they say. And we just had the benefit of being the live stream partner of ArabCon in Detroit, and those of us who were there. So I want to give a special shout out to everyone who we met in person, who let us know they were a patron. And everyone's patronage, of course, is greatly appreciated, but those people, you know who you are. Want to give a shout out to you and just say appreciate all of your contributions and really all of your hard work in spreading the news about our platform and letting people know that we're out here and we exist. So patreon.com/breakthrough news, patreon.com/breakthrough news. Hit the subscribe button, and in that down arrow, make sure that you have notifications on, so that way you can get access to all the great content we have coming to you here from BT. So on that note, we want to jump right into it here on today's show, and we want to start with a critically important issue on the world stage, one that a lot of people hear about, but maybe don't hear anything beyond just the skin-deep reporting. Well, we're going to go a little bit deeper than that, and that is the ongoing situation in the Democratic Republic of Congo and involving some of their neighbors, in particular Rwanda. And we are very honored to be joined here on the show once again by Kambale Musavuli, who is an analyst with the Center for Research on Congo, Kinshasa. As always, Kambale, thanks so much for being here with us.
Thank you always.
Well, I want to start with the sort of headline story that people are talking about, and that is the sentencing of former president of the Congo, Joseph Kabila, to death, being sentenced to death by a court in the DRC, although, of course, we don't know where he is, but not in judicial custody. But nonetheless, I think an interesting commentary on everything that's going on there. I guess I want to ask you, what the sort of proximate cause of this is that he's a part of a scheme involving Rwanda to try to essentially overthrow the government there in DRC. I wonder how you evaluate those claims and whether or not you think, or what you think this represents in terms of the judicial system in the DRC levying this charge now.
The situation with Joseph Kabila being sent to sentencing that's just been delivered is a path for accountability that many Congolese want, but I want us to dig much deeper. The reason why he's being sentenced is because of his visit to the eastern part of the DRC, where it's rebel control. And while he was there, and even before he arrived, he made comments such as that the M23 have legitimate claim, the Congolese government has to actually listen to, which is very bizarre because he's been quite silent for quite some time. and that when he appears in a rebel control area where Congolese have died in thousands for the past year, and no accountability for his action. So the Congolese government chose to pursue him. Now, Congolese have been calling for not because of what he did with the M23, but for many other crimes that he's committed. But my concern is the selective justice of the Congolese justice system now. Of course, every Congolese is happy to see that something has been delivered, but it's very selective and it's really for political reasons that the government in Kinshasa is doing so. It's for populist reasons. But two, it doesn't address the fundamental question of justice in DRC. Congolese are not just waiting for Kabila to be tried, right, or to be found guilty, right? Congolese are waiting for the implementation of the recommendation of the UN Mapping Exercise report, a report published in 2010, October 1st, 2010. So it's been 15 years. And this report, just as it is the case with Palestine, right, that it says that what's happening in the Congo is a genocide. Right? And it's actually the same office from the UN High Commission for Human Rights that just published a report on Palestine confirming that there is genocide. That same office in 2010 did the same thing for DRC. And in that report, it called for justice in a framework that Congolese support. It calls for an international tribunal for Congo, where we will try local actors, regional actors, multinationals, or anyone around the world involved in the crimes of the Congo. That's the justice that we're seeking, not a process of the Congolese government where they are using it in their favor and ignoring any other crimes taking place in DRC.
You know, I think that's a very important framing and a critical element because, you know, what the sort of Congolese government is doing and how they're positioning on this overall situation seems interesting. I mean, of course, there's a lot of denunciation of Rwanda coming from Kinshasa, a lot of denunciation of M23. But then, you know, there's the Qatar peace talks. Then there's the U.S.-sponsored Rwanda DRC element, which also had some more things that played out during the UN General Assembly week that seems to be basically centered on, you know, getting both countries to agree on working together to increase the U.S. control over mineral resources in the Congo. So I was hoping you could talk about that and where we are in this process, because obviously I think that's the one thing a lot of people do know about the Congo, that it is very minerally rich and that many people are contending over those resources.
Even Donald Trump said in his interview a few months back, right, when he was talking about the so-called peace deal that he's negotiating, and then he hinted that, oh, the U.S. got a lot of minerals, right? And usually tell people you have to listen to what Donald Trump says because he actually tells you what the imperial forces are doing, particularly in the U.S. context, right? Literally telling you their interest in the DRC are mineral resources. So for the deal specifically that the U.S. is engaged in, it's not a deal, it's a declaration of principle. When you read that very critically, you notice that there is a section in it around economic framework, right? A regional integration economic framework. So they talk about peace. They mention a rebel group from Rwanda called FDLR at least 40 times. They don't mention the M23 in there. But then there is a discussion of resource sharing. And in the discussion of resource sharing, it says that Congo must share not just its minerals, but also he has to share the management of the national parks, right? But that discussion of resource sharing of DRC with Rwanda changes the narrative of the conflict in the Congo. What is happening in the Congo? Millions have died in DRC, and it's a war of aggression by an aggressing nation, Rwanda, including Uganda, where they've pilfered Congo's resources for almost 3 decades. They invaded the Congo twice and continue to support proxy rebel militia. That's the premise. The way it's framed is that it's a Congolese affair where Rwanda is coming to support and quell the issue. But on the concrete basis of what we are seeing now, since the signing of this declaration of principle, is that I'll argue that Congo's minerals have found its way to Pennsylvania, right? And we just found out 2 days ago, right, that there is a company, an American company called GTP, Global Tungsten and Powder company, based out of Towanda, Pennsylvania, where they've pretty much put out even a photo showing that they receive tungsten from Rwanda directly to Pennsylvania, their first shipment. So they're doing it even in the open. But why am I saying that this is DRC's mineral, right? The Rwandan company, Trinity Metals, saying that this mineral is coming from a mine called Nyaka Bingo, if I'm not mistaken. And this mineral transited through Kenya, Nairobi, to find its way here in the US. So when you look at now who is involved, you see a statement from Traxys. Traxys is a company where this year, Global Witness published a report in 2025 showing that the minerals that Traxys has came from the M23 rebel control with the evidence that they have, right? And it's already also been documented that mines in Rwanda get minerals from DRC mixed and being sold as Rwandan minerals. So when we know that Rwanda does not have the volume of minerals that they are selling to the world, and openly countries such as Austria, countries like the United States, are openly getting minerals and taking pictures showing the world we got minerals from Rwanda, when they know that there is a high probability that this come from DRC, it tells me that the deal that Trump has negotiated is really to legitimize the pilfering of Congo's resources. Why? Because right now there is a competition between the United States and China for control of critical minerals. The US knows it. They know they do not have control of critical minerals in the world. China controls most of the critical minerals in the world, particularly in DRC. 80% of critical minerals in DRC transit through China now. And what they are trying to do is create a new supply chain. With the Rwandan deal, we see already minerals flying into Pennsylvania, right? GTP has the mineral. Through the south of the Congo with the Lobito corridor, it's the same process where you have American billionaire Friedland with his company Ivano Mining, where they are getting Congo's cobalt from the Katanga province all the way to the port in Baltimore. So we know the companies, we know who's making money, but in the context of the Congolese, no matter what deals they're signing, we are still dying. At least 7,000 people have died in the DRC since January. We still have reports of Congolese being abducted by the M23, forced into the rebel force to fight the Congolese military. We are still seeing activists, anyone who dare speak out in Goma or Bukavu, areas controlled by the M23, being killed, being tortured. Videos, messages are coming from the people on the ground. So for us, our fight continues. We're not going to wait for a peace deal in Doha. We're not going to wait for a peace deal in Washington, D.C. Patrice Lumumba already told us that it's not going to come from Paris, Brussels, Washington. The change in the Congo is going to come from the sons and daughters and the free and liberated people around the world at the side of the Congolese fighting to transform their country.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different aspects to how everything is playing out in the context of this. And I mean, to connect two things from our first to our second question here, I mean, I wonder if the whole issue of Kabila being propped up, the fact that M23, as we saw in the recent CNN report, is definitely not demobilizing in any way, is there's sort of a by hook or crook kind of strategy here. Either they're going to come to a deal mediated by the United States between DRC and Rwanda on how to parcel out these minerals so that they flow to U.S. companies, or there will be sort of a de facto, annexation by these Rwanda-aligned forces of these mineral-rich areas in the east to have the same thing happen just through other means.
The Western press has really done a good job to make it appear that since the signing of this deal, there is nothing happening on the ground. The eastern part of Congo today is de facto annexed to Rwanda, right? How do we even know that? Larry Madow from CNN, who interviewed Corneille Nangaa, the rebel,
yes,
he came into Goma through the rebel control area. He didn't apply for visa in Kinshasa to enter the DRC and interview rebel leaders there, right? So CNN reporters are entering the DRC to rebel control area with the blessing of the Rwandan government, allowing the movement. So de facto, the eastern part of DRC, particularly North and South Kivu province, areas controlled by the M23, is annexed with Rwanda. That's one aspect. The second thing to think about is every day, Congolese are still dying in the eastern part of the DRC. It's not covering world press. Every day, young Congolese, I wish I could show you messages I get and videos I receive from people that we work with on the ground. They are literally going schools to schools, abducting young people and forcing them to join the M23 to
Wow.
fight here. So the ramp up of the fight, there are still towns being taken every day, right? So no matter what happened with the peace negotiation, the facts on the ground shows that the military situation of the M23 controlling the area is still ongoing. But we cannot talk about the M23 without being very clear that this is the Rwandan Defense Forces, right? The type of military gear they have comes directly from the military forces of Rwanda. It's been already documented. We can go back, continue to say the Rwandan soldiers are on the ground fighting alongside with the M23. That's already a proven fact. The challenge now we face, which is also the challenge of humanity today, especially when we look at the situation of our brothers and sisters in Palestine, is the question of accountability. When you have evidence that there is genocide in Palestine, Netanyahu should not be coming to the UN General Assembly. The same thing is true for DRC. When we have a UN report that's now 15 years old, as of today, saying that what's happening in the Congo are war crimes, crimes against humanity, and possible genocide if proven in a competent court, and that court still doesn't exist, and those the perpetrator of the violence, be Kagame of Rwanda, Museveni of Uganda, are being flown into Western countries or Davos or the UN General Assembly with lack of accountability, it tells us today, in 2025, it would take ordinary people, such as the courageous people who are going on in the flotilla to stop the blockade in Gaza. The same thing needs to happen with the issues of the DRC, the issues of Sudan, the issues of African people who are fighting for dignity. And the speech by the Ghanaian president at the General Assembly is a call for many Africans. We know that Africa is the future. We also know that we have to align with others who are struggling, but we have to also have people around the world to expose companies such as GTP, right? Because people will say, well, what are the companies exploiting the Congo? Towanda, Pennsylvania, GTP, they are getting taxed on, saying it's coming from Rwanda, but we know there is a high probability it comes from DRC. Expose the corporate actors, expose the neighboring countries involved in the pilfering, hold our leaders accountable. Donald Trump is not getting a Nobel Peace Prize for bringing peace in the Congo when I have my family members and comrades on the ground sending me videos of people still being massacred. And call on people of conscience that as we are celebrating the centenary of leaders such as Fanon, such as Lumumba and others, that at this critical juncture, people of the world must unite to break the chains that's making us struggle for control of our land and our resources.
Mm-hmm. Well, as always, Kambale, we appreciate you helping us and enlightening us on all these various different issues and helping us sort through all the facts. And very, very interesting about what's happening there in Pennsylvania. And we'll certainly have to do more follow-up coverage on this end here at Breakthrough News to expose that even further. But as always, Kambale Musavuli, analyst with the Center for Research on Congo-Kinshasa, thank you so much for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Wow, really stunning, actually, the fact that there's a U.S. company here that is deeply involved. I mean, maybe it shouldn't be all that surprising to us, given the context of some of the companies we know are involved further down the line, Apple and others, in terms of the critical minerals, but it's even following down. And it's a bipartisan policy, one must say, that certainly started with Joe Biden. And if you go back and look at some of our previous interviews we did with Kambale during the Biden administration, we get into that in terms of opening up the so-called Lobito corridor from the Congo into Angola, working with Zambia, which is becoming more and more a U.S. proxy, to also open up new possibilities for the exploitation of minerals there in the Congo, flowing both south and southwest rather, if you will, out of the southern part of the DRC. So a lot going on many different elements, and we didn't even touch on the role Uganda's playing in the northeastern part. And of course, Mr. Museveni running for re-election there in Uganda. That process is just starting there in the past couple weeks. So a lot that we'll continue to cover and a lot that we will continue to look at. Now we want to turn our attention to another critically important issue, and that's the ongoing crackdown by the Trump administration on many cities around the country, so-called law and order crackdown using the National Guard and federal forces of various types, allegedly to combat crime, quote unquote. But I think there's a lot more wrapped inside of that. So to talk more about all of this, we are very, very honored to be joined in the show once again by Lawrence Grand Prix, who's the Director of Research at Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle. Lawrence, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, listen, it's great to have you as always. And, you're based in Baltimore, which, of course, has been in the crosshairs of Mr. Trump rhetorically. And in fact, even again today on the White House social media account about the whole issue of, quote unquote, crime in the city of Baltimore. But so far, they have not yet moved as aggressively on the National Guard issue. But they are sending the National Guard into Memphis, it seems, into Memphis, and also into New Orleans, it seems, into New Orleans and some of these blue cities and red states. So, I mean, maybe to start, give us a sense of how you think that this is playing out, both A, the calculations of the White House, and B, why it is that sort of some Democrats seem willing to sort of let this happen while others, at least in a rhetorical sense, are pushing back more.
Yeah, so I think the calculation of the White House is they want to make the midterms in 26 a Willie Horton midterms. They know that crime is one of the issues where they're most trusted, I believe, because of the embedded racial scripts people have around cities and around Black people and crime. And to a certain extent, they want to take credit for what is a massive crime decline in these blue cities. So the problem, of course, being these are blue mayors in these blue cities. And you are able to get around that by having a show of force, like what they're doing in Memphis is not the full mobilization. They have about 150 National Guard folks that are around. Largely, the idea is their presence is a visible deterrent for crime. It allows Trump to claim credit for what his crime declines he had very little to do with. We've talked about the grassroots violence prevention work happening, especially in blue cities and blue states, happening around the country, but also in red states. I think that Democrats are in a tough position because they've overlearned the lesson they wanted to learn from 24, which is they got too woke, they went too far left on crime, that people are claiming that they want to go to the center. The reality is that it is the policies that advocates have pushed for that have slowed the rate of the violent attack on Black communities by mass incarceration that helps stabilize communities as well as grassroots violence prevention, which allows for the crime to decline. But of course, Trump wants to be able to create a dynamic where he can take credit for those crime declines. And to conclude, they are in a position where they say no to the National Guard, but they say yes to the ATF, yes to the FBI, yes to the good law enforcement, the legal law enforcement. And to kind of get something I want to hit on, it's kind of like the liberal Zionists versus the conservative hardcore Zionists. The Trump National Guard wing is we need to occupy Gaza, we need to destroy Gaza, it's animals there. While the liberals on crime are very similar to liberal Zionists in terms of like, we need a lawful occupation, we need lawful proportionate use of force policies, the Department of Justice, ATF, not National Guard, but the ideology is still the same. The idea is to legitimate police presence with the liberal Zionists. Similarly, they want to legitimate and affirm constitutional good policing with the liberals on crime.
I think that's such a good point, and I wonder if you think there's this sort of the opposite side of that parallel is around the issue of self-determination, that when we talk about the sort of community-based violence interruption in the same way we talk about Palestinian efforts to govern themselves in humanity, the thing that they really fear is the possibility of, if communities can come together and prevent crime significantly without the police, have they sort of slipped out of the control, even if it's in a small way, of the state, and have they built power in a way that makes it more difficult to impose upon them the policies you would like to?
Absolutely. And to stick with, I think it's a core metaphor, given the flotilla and what I know your audience is on their hearts right now. I think that for the cities, the presence of crime delegitimates rule. Similar to how in Gaza, the presence of quote unquote terrorism delegitimates Islamic rule or Hamas rule, right? So the idea is that these people cannot be trusted to govern themselves because look at the results, chaos and violence. I think similarly, in Black cities and Democrat cities, you have the desire to have NGOs and nonprofits take over the infrastructure of violence prevention in these cities because when they're tied to Black governance, it's not trustworthy. It's corruption. It's handing handouts to people who might be corrupt. Very similar to like, we can't just give any sort of Palestinian-run institution aid or power. It has to all go through internationally moderated NGOs. So I think it's this thing where people talk about fascism is imperialism coming home. I think if you have a view of Black people in America as essentially an internal colony, it's kind of a bidirectional thing, where the scripts we gain from local news media, again, Sinclair Media, is on their board is Howard Friedman, the former head of AIPAC. And the narratives and scripts they use about violence in cities is very similar to the propaganda techniques they use to attack people in the Middle East. I was looking at a story in Nashville, which has the Sinclair Media station. They said it has a 25% increase in youth charged as adults. Now, that's technically true, but it was from 8 to 10. And that is their 25% increase in crime. It is very, very similar to the sorts of propaganda that they use in the Middle East to say Hamas is recruiting young people. They're recruiting young terrorists in the madrasas. So we have to either bomb the madrasa, the conservative view, or we have to send the NGOs in to take over the madrasa. So again, I think we see a very similar thing with the nonprofit industrial complex here and the NGO complex abroad, all around this concept that we cannot trust these people to govern themselves.
Well, I'm glad you raised the issue of Sinclair Media and the role it plays, and I want to talk more about that. But of course, and now everyone's talking about Sinclair Media because of what happened with Jimmy Kimmel, and I think most people had no idea maybe who they are. But I think what's been revealed is that, Sinclair and Nexstar, these are very powerful corporations in both their ability to shape media, but the control of the stations, the ability to even shape the networks. And I don't know where my question is, but I was hoping you could just talk more about that, because I feel now the sort of power of these networks is being revealed a little bit more to, I think, many Americans who were unaware.
Yeah, that's a great point. So people heard about when Jimmy Kimmel came back, he wasn't allowed to come back on the so-called affiliates. And there were 2 affiliates, I think Nexstar and Sinclair, that were like, we don't like what he did. We don't want to bring him back. Now, eventually they did, but that's because Nexstar wants to merge, and also Sinclair wants to do mergers that have to be affirmed by Trump's Federal Communications Commission. But on top of that, David Smith, the executive chairman of Sinclair Media, is an ideological right-wing person. He owns media networks in many blue cities, not just blue cities, but many blue cities. It's not always Fox, but it's oftentimes just a local news network. And in the cities where he owns them, people have noted that his coverage tends to be more sensationalist, doing the sort of statistical tricks that sort of center crime as a concern, largely marketing to the suburbs. So again, people can believe that Gaza is a cesspool of violence because it's very similar to the scripts we have about cities in America when you live in the suburbs. They are pits of decay and violence because you're pumped over and over with Sinclair Media propaganda. He's actually stated that he actually only economically does well with Sinclair during election years because his idea is to cultivate a more conservative, afraid of crime suburban base and have politicians run ads on his stations going to them, right? So on top of all that, Howard Friedman, he's on the board of the whole Sinclair Media, not just our local Fox station. They happen to be based here in Baltimore. But Howard Friedman lives in Baltimore, but just an example, he gets involved in local political campaigns supporting tough on crime Democrats. He's a Democrat, right? So as the former head of AIPAC, he's involved in using the Sinclair Media station here locally to carry talking points from the conservative Democrats and from the chiefs and sheriffs to become their propaganda wing, right? So when he's supporting folks like Dahlia Tarr, who's the senator in Northwest Baltimore, which is like a divided, partially Jewish, partially Black neighborhood, he's using the scripts from Sinclair to attack the Black political representation in that community and make people feel they need a tough on crime Democrat like Dahlia Tarr, right? So these are people who are direct political players in some cases. He gives a lot to UDP, which is like the non-AIPAC that went after Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman. But they use the political narratives of propaganda to local news to explicitly make racialized attacks on the Black community that very much mirror what they're doing to the Palestinians in Palestine.
Wow. I mean, there's so many different elements to this. I mean, even just the value of, I think a lot of people who are like also sort of cord cutters in this reality forget how impactful this is. I mean, if for no other reason, it comes on right after sports, but many other things, that there are so many people, parents who are, waking up and looking to see what's going on with schools and all these different factors that I think are sort of critically important. And obviously they know that, and they're putting that together in a way. So, and I think the fact that he's a Democrat kind of blows me away, just to be honest with you. I mean, I guess I shouldn't be surprised, but it's like, this is the network that was putting Boris Afashian on every single station just a couple years ago, who is now, another top Trump advisor. So we're bringing those sort of two things together. And I wonder how you are sort of evaluating this sort of because obviously, you're seeing Wes Moore is not playing the same game as the mayor of Memphis. You know what I mean? The mayor and the governor in Chicago are not doing the same piece there. I mean, they're sort of offering a more kind of rhetorical pushback to Trump in some senses, but also, doing their own pieces, like Maryland doing the state police surge and different things like that. So I wonder how you're evaluating those elements who are pushing back a little harder in Trump in the mainstream, but if it does, it still leaves something to be desired.
It's very much a pushback in terms of affect and style when there are fundamental similarities in substance. Again, Maryland has the highest number of youth charged as adults in the almost in the entire country. So when you see the DC occupation literally using talking points about young people being super predators, young folks breaking curfew, young folks not being able to have real consequences charged as adults, again, because it's extrajudicial, because it's the National Guard and not the local PD, the liberals, including Wes Moore, say that's illegal, that's not effective, that's not sustainable. And maybe they have a point. It really isn't sustainable. When the National Guard came to Baltimore after Freddie Gray in 2015, when they left, we had a massive explosion and shootings and crime. But the idea is that we don't need you to occupy us. We'll occupy ourselves. So we'll have a surge of state troopers basically using the same logic. And it's very important because part of the idea of grassroots violence prevention is that we're going to send credible messages to give people not just services like jobs and healthcare, but a new vision that if you follow us, you can actually live a life of self-respect and you can actually escape the violence and fear that's plagued you your whole life. And now you're going to community and you're saying, look, I did everything right. I put the gun down, got off the corners, and they still talk about us like we're animals. They're still occupying us, whether it's state troopers or National Guard. So what do we say to those people when the very governor who promotes grassroots violence prevention as a reason why we don't need the National Guard uses the same logic of occupation with the state troopers, right? So it's not just that it's like sort of liberal, proceduralist, fair occupation. It directly challenges the logic of the violence prevention work that's been so effective at bringing the crime down in the cities and has been in the mouths of Democrats as to why we don't need the National Guard. So we really have to go deeper and think through a theory about why crime happens. It's how people interpret their space in the world, where if they're going to treat me like an animal anyway, I might as well crash out and get it while I can. But when you change the vision of possibilities through violence prevention and mentors and trusted guides, guiding them to alternatives, that solves crime better than deterrence through incarceration or occupation. And that's just empirically proven at this point.
No, I think it's a good point, and I think it also speaks to the psychology of Black working class communities because, obviously so many of these people will often point out, well, if you poll people, they say that they really care about crime. But one of the things I always point out to people is when you look at a lot of those polls, the one I think about the most, the Economist YouGov poll, because at least last year they were asking the two questions back to back. They'd say, do you think crime is important? And the percentage of Black people would be, let's say 78% would say it's a big issue. Then the next question would be, do you think civil rights are important? And 78% of Black people would say the same. So it's like, just because people are saying they're concerned about public safety does not mean that they are then endorsing any, particular policy from the point of view of more police, more occupations, so on and so forth. Not that there aren't people who support that, but it does seem like there is a flattening of opinion in Black communities that makes it seem like people don't care about their own human rights if they care about public safety.
Yeah, I think James Foreman's book, James Foreman Jr.'s We're Locking Up Our Own, really, I didn't think it was perfect. But he does say that when we talked about crime, we always meant an all of the above approach. Well, I mean, some of us meant an explicitly not policing approach and then all the other stuff. Right. But most Black people mean all of the above. I think part of the challenge for us is to explain to folks there's a point where all of the above, they can't all work together anymore. Like we're getting to the point where hospital-based violence prevention, people are shot and stabbed up in hospitals, and the violence prevention folk have a hard time gaining their trust because they're basically getting interrogated by the cops in their bedside before the violence prevention folks even get to them. And when you have these massive budgets expanding over and over, when you have budget cuts like now, it just makes it hard for the violence prevention ecosystem to coexist with the policing. So we really have to make the argument that as much as Black people are desperate for anything, and they'll say, just give me anything. But what they want is jobs, mentoring, and many of them do want police. We have to explain to them that the narratives and scripts about deterrence that we've gotten from propaganda don't actually work. Like if I have people around me trying to shoot me who are in the community, I'm going to carry a gun no matter what the sentence is because I'd rather be caught with it than without it. Like if I need to use it, I need to have it on me. And the ramifications of dying are worse than going to jail. So we have to change the conditions in community that leads to people feeling they need to engage in the underground economy and they need to carry guns. But also if they are in the community and doing things that are survival economics, we have to have appropriate punishment and not just sew you away for 10, 15 years for just carrying an illegal gun. You can't get a legal one if you have a marijuana conviction that you can get in Baltimore for just being black and male and outside, right? So we have to really talk to people about the lies, about the deterrent scripts and the lies that people get services in jail to be able to counter not just occupation from the right, but also just proceduralist occupation from the left or the center.
As always, fascinating conversation. Appreciate you breaking this down, bringing interesting perspectives on. Lawrence Grand Prix, Director of Research at Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle, based in the great city of Baltimore. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Critically important issues, ongoing issues. We'll continue to cover it. Obviously, Trump doesn't seem like he's slowing down anytime soon. In fact, he seems to be accelerating this, in my view, completely contrived crackdown that isn't about anything that he says it's about. Well, speaking of crackdowns, we want to turn to another critically important story, and that is the ongoing protest movement happening in Morocco, where there's been some serious crackdowns on protests, but they continue to grow. As far as I can see there, young people have taken to the streets, or mainly young people have taken to the streets around some critical socio and economic demands there. And we are very, very happy to be joined for the show as we continue this discussion by Wahid Ben Ali, who is with the International People's Assembly. Wahid, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks to having me, Eugene, in this session.
No, it's our honor to have you here. So maybe just to start, what's driving these protests? I mean, what drove such large numbers of people to take to the streets?
So before starting with the Moroccans, I just want to salute the participants that they are in flotilla and now they are between the hand of IDF. And we have many comrades from Morocco and from other countries in the region that they are arrested. So we salute their struggle and we salute the struggle of the Palestinians. So yeah, the youth in Morocco is not something new. The protest is not new, and everyone know all the process that Morocco have before. So the 20 February in 2011 and the Husima uprising, Jrada uprising is a kind of accumulation of repression and accumulation of all kind of violence that was against them. So, and this is not just led by the young, because it's led by the youth, but in the same time there is many generations. But the youth, they call themselves GenZ 212. 212, that means the phone sign of Morocco. So it's like a patriotic movement, and they are just expressing how the repression that they was in for a long time, the life that they are suffering. In Morocco there is a lot of issue, and the last month one of the big issue was the health care situation, because one of the hospital that have a lot of problem was an hospital in Agadir, who is 6 women was pregnant. They died there because it was no infrastructure and was nothing there. So that hospital is like you cannot call it a hospital because it's not humanitarian. It's like I don't want to say something so harsh, but the situation is so bad in that hospital, so that lead the protest in Agadir. And after Agadir, it starts to be in many cities because they see that the situation is not improving. There is no education, there is no health care, there is no, the percentage of employment is so high. So the youth was they have some characterized, because those youth are between 21 and 28. So they are not with the traditional way to struggle. They are not with the kind of statement. They don't have the possibility to get into the media platform, the official media platform, TVs. So they don't have this possibility. So they create kind of contact between them in Discord. So it's the next generation media platform. So they was expressing their speech inside Discord, and after that they decide that we cannot do it in the way that we are doing it in this platform, but we need to go to the street. And they start to have a mobilization. First time was some discussion was not good organized, but after that they decide, no, we need to take street, we need to high our voice, and we need to, that's the other side, listen to our speech.
Thank you for outlining that. And it's interesting to see, and I'm wondering maybe the role of income inequality here, because to hear that, people are lacking healthcare, people are lacking education, but then, if you read the Western media, you hear, Morocco is growing 3%. I've seen some pictures of some very nice stadiums for the World Cup. So it seems like the issue maybe is not necessarily money, but the distribution of resources.
Yeah, it's one of the big issue, because always was the same demand. That's the wealth, the kind of wealth is just between the hand of a few people, and one of them is the patriarchy there. So and the issue that Morocco last 2 months ago, the king of Morocco was saying that Morocco is going with 2 speed. The problem that's the 2 speed, 1 speed is so low, so there is no 2 speed. There is 1 speed that Morocco is going, and the other people, they are suffering from a huge difference between the other one. So the issue that Morocco, they are building stadium, and they are preparing to receive the World Cup, and they are preparing to receive the African Cup also in January. So the investment is not going to we can see the people claiming. So they are going with more with some secondary things. So the people don't have any relation with it. So last month they built a stadium with more than 1 billion in just 1 year. But the hospital Morocco was suffering from the lack of hospital, the lack of education, the lack of employment for more than 50, 60 years. So from the independence that was in 1957. So it's 2 speed, but the speed that the people are suffering, that there is no hospital, nothing that they can live with. So the youth was just saying that like they are just letting to live in a kind of animal situation, primitive life. So it's not something that they are taking anything from the country. I will give you an example about the healthcare, because we are speaking about healthcare. Morocco, after the COVID, we have a kind of pasteur that is a kind of laboratory to make the vaccine. So Morocco was saying that we need to have a public-private relation between those two, between pasteur, who is a public laboratory, and the private. So they give the market to another private sector. So after 3 and 4 years, now they recognize that our plan was that we need to make vaccine in Morocco, but the private laboratory was just importing the vaccine from outside, and was just getting more money from the Morocco to make this kind of experiment, but they didn't do anything. So that is why the Moroccan, they are saying that there is a few people that they are taking all the advantage of Morocco, and the other people in the ground, they are suffering from the harsh situation without anything to see. And other thing also, the last 5 months was a earthquake in Atlas, and people until now they are living in tent, in a bed. And you need to know the situation in winter in Atlas is so bad. So people are just walking without anything. So they are living in tent. The situation is harsh. So the youth of those family, they are also targeted by this measure. So they are saying, yeah, the government and the system in Morocco, they are just letting to us to live in a bad way, and at the same time they are taking advantage of us.
One thing I want to ask you, because, over the past couple years, we've also seen, and you mentioned at the outset here, tremendous solidarity with Palestine and Morocco. And my assumption would be that some of the people on the streets here now have also been those who have been protesting, the normalization with Israel and the ongoing genocide. Is there any crossover between those issues in terms of how this is playing out?
No, the Morocco was using the normalization first time when they signed their normalization with the Israeli to say that this agreement was because the US was identifying that the Western Sahara is part of Morocco. So that was a kind of a big lie, because after that come the every administrative in US, it started another discussion also about the same issue. So there is no relation between normalization and the what is happening in streets, or so struggles, except that Morocco is signing the normalization, but the movement in Morocco is one of the biggest in the region, because people didn't stop mobilizing for Palestine and didn't stop mobilizing for the case. So they see it like one of the national case. So there is no way that they will stop it. So the mobilization now is more about social life, is more about unemployment. There are a lot of people that they are saying, yeah, this kind of protest is just pushed by the exterior forces. So, and many times they are speaking about Algeria, they are speaking about other country, but it's the same speech every time that there is an issue in Morocco. So it's not about, so the speech is always that is not coming from the people, is coming from outside of Morocco. Like I just watched the communication spokesman of the government was saying, yeah, we need to have a person who will give us the demand. So we cannot just go to protest in the street. We need to give us a demand. We need to know who is mobilizing. So who is mobilizing are the youth. That is one. Second one, the demand is not something that's so high. The demand is we can see it like the primitive demand. It's not demand, it's a right. The education, the health, the employment, the freedom, all of them are not a demand. It's a kind of a right of the people to have them. And if they don't have it, they are not living the human rights being correctly. So the issue is the system in Morocco was saying always that the association and the parties as like intermediate. That is why the government and the political party, the administrative political party, they are like intermediate between the system in Morocco and the people. And if there is a new government, it's just doing the same thing. So there is no change. Since the independence, there is the same politics. Nothing is happening. Nothing can change. And if there is an uprising or something like what is happening now, it's always with the violence and with the repression.
And, the final thing I want to ask you is on that note. I mean, we have obviously seen some pretty brutal repression, but the protests seem to be continuing and quite large in many places. So obviously, I know that you can't predict the future, but I mean, do you predict that at least in the coming days, the protests will continue? And do you think that it's possible that they could grow?
In the last day, the government was making a lot of statements. But the issue that I don't think Morocco have the statement is more about, yeah, we will see the demand, we will treat the demand. But the problem that Morocco have invest a lot of some secondary things. So if they need to do something with those demand, they need to change the way that they are seeing the thing. But I don't think the authority will do it in 1 month or 2 months. But the protests want to see the change in the urgent time. So they cannot wait more, because they are just saying if we are waiting more, the system will just find that we are not protesting anymore. So they will just go with the way that they are going with. So I think the protest will continue, because, and you know that yesterday 3 or 4 people was died in Morocco because was some protest in Bnei Millel, in a kind of countryside of Bnei Millel. So, and some people was that is the official statement. So they are saying that some people was trying to get into the police office, so the police office would just keeping the gun away from them. So when the thing get bad, so they use the gun. So 3 people was died yesterday, and this one is remember us in February 2011 when 5 people was burned in a bank, and in that time the authority was saying that they was trying to stall what is inside the bank. And after that, in the court, the family was asking for the video and for the video recording, but no one give them anything. Yeah, this time is a little bit different because there is some record video that they are showing those people who was trying to get in. But if the government and the system stay in the same way with those protests and with those mobilization, I think that the protests will continue until they get something that will just make them a little bit down. Because what is happening now, there is no reaction, there is no speech from the governments that make the people quiet about what will happen in the future. So I think we will see in the next day if we will have more involvement of the trade union, if there is more political party that will just lead those kind of movements, because we know that with that time, if you don't have a kind of entity that can lead those kind of movement, that will just lose with the time.
Well, a lot to continue to watch here and to follow, and we appreciate you coming on to help us sort through it all. Wahid Ben Ali with the International People's Assembly, thank you so much for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you.
Well, it is very interesting, great world historic significance. For people who don't watch Morocco, a major country in the sort of broader Mediterranean basin, major country in Africa, involved in many different pieces all across the continent, a lot at stake here in terms of what the outcome of this protest could be. So we will continue watching and continue covering what is going on there and bringing you as much as we can, of course. We want to turn now to just the story that I think is hanging over us every day. That's the ongoing genocide in Gaza, the broader attempts to break the back of the Palestinian people, and of course the fact that the Palestinian people refuse to be broken, and the people of the world are rising up in massive, unprecedented numbers, many say, in solidarity with them. So to get into everything swirling around this, we are very, very honored to be joined here on the show once again by Yara Shufani, who is a member of the Palestinian Youth Movement. Yara, thank you so much for being back with us.
Thanks so much for having me on the show.
Well, great to have you here. I want to start with the, I guess I should use air quotes, peace plan that's been presented by Donald Trump here, 21 points that I guess have been edited also by Netanyahu. So maybe we should call it the Trump-Netanyahu plan. But, obviously for many people who are seeing the genocide, Yara, people want to see things stop. So I think there are many people who are probably thinking, oh, great, there's a peace plan. Maybe this could happen. So what is the substance of this, and how should people be thinking about it?
Yeah, I think it's good that you used the air quotes there, Eugene, and also called it the Trump-Netanyahu peace plan. I think that's really accurate. And I think the best way to understand this plan is that it's not actually a peace plan. It's not actually a plan that's interested in any kind of ceasefire resolution or ending the genocide. But actually what this is a ploy designed by Trump and Netanyahu together as a way to counter Israel's isolation on a world scale, and as a way to put conditions or sort of put a set of choices in front of Hamas where it's sort of a lose-lose situation really for the Palestinian people. And what I mean by that is that over the course of the last few months, especially, we've seen a major escalation in terms of people's dissatisfaction with this war at a mass scale, including all across the United States, including within Trump's own base, segments of Trump's mega movement really starting to be really critical of Israel. Most recently, we saw European nations in a very flawed, but nonetheless, interesting kind of attempt, go against the United States in asserting that they will be recognizing a Palestinian state. And so, really, the U.S. and Israel have been starting to become increasingly isolated on a world scale. And this plan is an attempt to turn the tables and actually create a situation where if Hamas accepts the plan, we're looking at an effective surrender on many levels, and we can get into the details of why that is. And then, of course, if Hamas declines the plan, then the United States and Israel will be able to re-galvanize support for Israel's ongoing genocide. And I think it's important to say that Netanyahu said this himself. So the day after his White House meeting, he had an interview where he spoke in Hebrew to a Hebrew audience, where he basically says word for word that Israel was isolated. That when he came to the United States, Israel was isolated, and he says, I quote, "Instead of Hamas isolating us, we turned the tables and isolated Hamas. Now the entire world, including the Arab and Muslim world, is pressuring Hamas to release the hostages, all while the IDF remains in most of the Gaza Strip." And so I think Netanyahu is being really clear here. This is a plan where Hamas's acceptance will give Israel the ability to, say that the Palestinians have surrendered and set a set of conditions that are extremely unfavorable for the Palestinian people. And then on the flip side, if Hamas declines on the premise that this would be catastrophic for the Palestinian people, then we would see an attempt to kind of frame Hamas as the block or sort of the barrier to peace, despite the reality that we're on 2 years of a genocide where Israel has killed hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, expanded its war into the broader region, just last month assassinated or, killed negotiators that were trying to assess one of Trump's last plans. And so, they're looking for a way to actually reframe who the barrier to peace is.
Mm-hmm. No, I think is a great framing, and it's talk more about what acceptance would really mean in this context. And obviously, it's a real tough reality, I think, in terms of either side of this. But I said to someone when I saw the Trump 21-point plan, I said, it reminds me of the Belgian Congo, with Trump as the king, Blair as the governor, and this so-called security force as the force publique. And it's stunning, honestly, and even calling it a peace plan. But, if there is an acceptance, what does that mean in terms of the context for what's going to happen in Gaza and for Palestinians more broadly?
Yeah, look, the details of the plan are, really nefarious on multiple levels, right? We see the plan really tie concretely the question of aid and the ability of aid to enter, and tied with demilitarization and surrender, right? And so while the plan kind of positions itself as saying, look, we're going to allow 600, if this plan is accepted, we'll allow 600 trucks to enter a day, equipment, to remove rubble and so on, and it'll be the United Nations administering that. Ultimately, what we actually know is that is going to be tied to surrender and demilitarization. And so only in areas that become effectively demilitarized, where, we see the Hamas surrender and there's a complete demilitarization, would have access to this kind of aid. And so effectively what, the United States is saying is that after a 2-year-long war where Israel has shown itself to be a genocidal entity, it is the Palestinian people who must, lay down their arms and commit to not only, to essentially commit to not even having defensive capabilities. And that this is what aid is conditional upon. The plan is structured into 3 phases, where within the first phase, within 72 hours of accepting the plan, Hamas would be required to release all of the hostages that are being held, both the alive and deceased hostages, and that in turn Israel would release 1,700 Palestinians who have been held hostage by Israel since the October 7th, 2023, and up to 250 Palestinian prisoners who are being detained and held with life sentences. And so this is within the first phase of the plan. But then as you move into the second phase of the plan, what you actually see is there's sort of a mapping. So, phase 1 follows a certain kind of map. Phase two, there, Trump has crafted maps as Western nations love to do when it comes to the Arab region and much of the global South. And so, crafted these maps where essentially Israel would be allowed to stay in Gaza, a continued encirclement of Gaza, and would allow for Israeli soldiers to remain in the Philadelphia corridor, which is Gaza's border with Egypt, and Gaza's really only border with the outside world. And they would stay in these areas until an international force is set up. And this would be, a combination of American and Arab nations that are, force. I think they may be using language here of peacekeepers, but I don't necessarily want to use this language, who would then, be stationed and play the role of enforcing to ensure that demilitarization is taking place. And only once that happens, would there be, an entrance into phase three. And you mentioned something really important, Eugene, you talked about Tony Blair and so on. And this is an essential part of this plan as well, which is the setting up of a transitional government. And I think Trump used the language of a board of peace, where, it would be chaired by Donald Trump, and other members of would include heads of state, including former Prime Minister Tony Blair. This is a technocratic board that would really oversee the administration of Gaza, which would at the center of it have Tony Blair, a war criminal who led the invasion of Iraq, which murdered over 1 million Iraqis, whose institute major donor is Larry Ellison of Oracle. This is the same Larry Ellison who's now acquired TikTok in what is widely understood as being, a huge benefit to Israel. And this is a major donor for Tony Blair's, institute. And so we're talking here about an arrangement that involves people like Jared Kushner, involved in the administering of Gaza, Donald Trump, Tony Blair, really like a plan that would really restructure Gaza and allow for these major figures within the American political terrain, who stand a lot to benefit from development and exploitation and extractive economies and so on, giving them a central role in the administration of the Gaza Strip. So this is a plan that has nothing really to do with the Palestinian people. It's no surprise that no Palestinians were involved in the drafting of this plan. This was drafted, collaboratively between Trump and Netanyahu, despite attempts by some liberal kind of commentators to suggest that Netanyahu is mad about this plan. I think it's clear that he's not. And that really there were no Palestinians involved in the drafting of this plan because it has nothing really to do with Palestinian self-determination or freedom.
I'm glad you made the point about Netanyahu saying that they're isolating people, because certainly we've seen the rising tide of solidarity with Palestine only continue to grow around the context of the global Samud flotilla, which has unleashed a new wave of protest around the world in addition to everything else. I mean, talk about the significance of the flotilla and some of what's coming from it, because I think it has in some ways really kind of, I don't want to say reignited as if it went away, but you can see, whether we're talking about Italy or wherever, the movement in solidarity with Palestine has really been lifted by those who have been willing to risk so much by going on this flotilla, which now I believe has been overtaken by the Israelis, and those who are on there are in custody, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. I believe, the ships were all detained just last night, and some early this morning. I mean, one I think actually made its way into Gaza waters for the first time. And, we were talking here about 50 civilian ships, 400 people, that made the trek from all across the world in an attempt to break the siege on Gaza, a siege that has been ongoing for over 19 years and that has effectively turned Gaza into an open-air prison, which is particularly detrimental in the course of this genocide. But even before this genocide began, really the siege has been responsible for mass destruction and death and starvation in Gaza. And so I think the escalation of the flotilla is what started off with one flotilla and now is growing into a movement of people around the world that are determined to break the siege on Gaza, to get aid to Gaza and to stand with the Palestinian people, is in such a stark contrast to what we're seeing, leaders of the quote unquote free world do, right, and say, and while they send weapons, countries like the United States and Canada and Britain and so on have all these weapons contracts with Israel. The people of the world are trying to get aid into Gaza, right? And I think that just shows so concretely, when we say that the world stands with the Palestinian people, that this is, I think, a really, really clear example of that you have activists and regular people who are risking everything to get on these flotillas and try to break the siege. And it has a significance in the sense that not only does it show the way in which the world stands with Gaza, not only is it such a critical act of defiance against the powers at be, the large Western powers that are isolating Gaza from the world, but I think it also really speaks to just the inevitability of the siege, of the breaking of the siege. Like the siege, the siege, which has been for so many Palestinians, like any Palestinian under the age of 19, the siege is all they've known. The blockade is all they've known. And I think that so many of us, even growing up, like in our collective memories, Gaza has been under siege, and the flotillas really represent a determination by the people of the world that the siege is not going to be a permanent siege. And, I think even just to sort of tie it to the peace plan, like Trump's proposed 20-point peace plan, is that, Israel and the United States are putting forward a plan as if they are interested in getting aid into Gaza. But then just 24 hours later are detaining and seizing, 400 people who are trying to get aid into Gaza, right? Because that aid that the Samud flotillas are trying to get in is, of course, not conditional on the disarmament of the Palestinian people or their surrender or their capitulation, but is based in the principles of freedom and self-determination, right? And so I do think that the movement that we're seeing in terms of people all across the world taking on a variety of tactics and trying to do all that they can in order to end this genocide is a reflection of the conviction that the movement and that Palestine has instilled in the broader movement and in the hearts and minds of people. And I just no matter how many no matter how much visits to the United States Netanyahu does, no matter how much they pay TikTok influencers, to spew Israeli propaganda, Zionist propaganda, ultimately, I think that what we've seen in terms of a mass movement over the last few years and what the flotillas in particular represent show us that all of these efforts to control the narrative and to win people back over to Israel's side are going to be futile because people's lives have really changed forever in terms of, their support and conviction for the Palestinian people.
Mm-hmm. No, it seems to be very much the case. And from the flotilla to the People's Arms embargo, we're seeing all sorts of interesting and exciting types of protest emerge to address this genocide, which millions and millions do not want to see done in their name. Well, we really appreciate you, as always, Yara, helping us sort through it all. Yara Shafani from the Palestinian Youth Movement, thanks so much for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Mm-hmm. Yes, quite a bit happening. Protests happening yesterday, today, around the world in relationship to the seizure of the flotilla, the humanitarian flotilla, by the Israeli forces. Tomorrow in Italy, keep your eyes on Italy. There is a call for a 24-hour general strike from the largest trade union federation. Dock workers are pledging to hot cargo, many different things. So we can see all across today in Spain, a student strike, I believe, is happening. So you can see all across the world, what's happening with the flotilla is not just happening with the flotilla, but people of conscience everywhere are rising in solidarity with the Palestinian people and those who are willing to take the risk to break the blockade. So we'll continue covering all of this and showing you as much of it as we can as we continue to move forward on this issue and on every other issue we talked about today. But before we get out of here, one final story I just want to bring up and mention before we leave. I mean, amidst everything else, the U.S. government is shut down. So there's a U.S. government shutdown going on. It's been going on for about 2 days. And essentially a government shutdown means that some things that are considered essential services continue. Say Social Security checks keep going out. Some things are conditional. You don't know. The government can kind of decide whether or not they want to keep them going. But the vast majority of government services shut down. Many government workers are put on furlough. And in fact, as Trump brought up here today, something that he called a hoax, by the way, during the campaign, Project 2025, one of the main authors, Russ Vought, who is the director of the Office of Management and Budget at the White House, is meeting with Trump to talk about how they can try to permanently lay off hundreds of thousands of federal workers, at least potentially during this shutdown. So very serious, very significant situation here that is going on with the U.S. government. And the question is, why is the government shut down? I think the most important thing for everyone to realize is the government is shut down as this is part of the attempt by the Republicans to bulldoze any opposition whatsoever to their broader agenda, which is to make the rich richer, the poor poorer, and make it so difficult for the rest of us that we're essentially treading water, barely keeping our head above the tide line, as it were. So this is part and parcel of what we've been seeing since Trump came in with the one big beautiful bill. But the proximate issue here, like I said, they have a broad agenda. The proximate issue here is the healthcare portion of the agenda. There's some other things that I'll get to, but what the Democrats are placing their willingness to compromise on is what you see on the screen there, and that is the 15 million people who will lose healthcare under the Republican plan that was passed earlier this year in the partial passure of the budget, the so-called one big beautiful bill. 15 million people, a $1.1 trillion cut. So that means a lot of people will be kicked off because of Medicaid, which was a big conversation people can remember from the one big beautiful bill. But many people will lose health care because they will also lose access to the subsidies for the American Care Act, the ACA, the so-called Obamacare. So when you put it together, at least 15 million people. That's another thing that we don't even know what the full impact of this is going to be, because there's all these other realities. Like, for instance, one of the things that will probably go away are zero premium plans that exist under the ACA exchange marketplace. So people who then have to pay something that they didn't have to pay month to month for healthcare, will they be able to come up with the money, or will they just be off healthcare? So we say $1.1 trillion cut, 15 million people kicked off of their healthcare, but it could in fact be more than 15 million people who lose their healthcare. So this is a dire situation. And by the way, if you look on year increases in inflation, the cost of healthcare in the past month or last month went up 4.2% from September of 2024. So the cost of healthcare already rising. People are going to be losing Medicaid. People are going to be losing ACA subsidies. So again, $1.1 trillion cut to healthcare, and at least 15 million people who are going to be kicked off. The Republicans have decided they want to shut down the government rather than make a change and walk any of that back. So that's really an amazing thing when you think about it. And I think another sort of aspect of this that we have to remember is that the other parts of this are also bad. Like, we're talking a lot about healthcare, but there are also things that the Democrats have just said that they'll let slide. I mean, one aspect, of course, are the massive $1 trillion tax cuts that were given away that were also a part of the one big beautiful bill. And by the way, one of the biggest beneficiaries of these corporate wing of those tax cuts are the healthcare companies. And there's an extension of a tax break, quote unquote tax break, really just, robbing people essentially for these healthcare insurers, that a recent examination looked at this going back to 2017, and that from 2017 until very recently, roughly $34 billion was funneled into the pockets of the biggest healthcare companies through this tax break. So that was extended in the one big beautiful bill. So, not only are they potentially kicking 15 million people off of their healthcare by trying to push through this agenda, through this shutdown, but they're also trying to lock in tax breaks. So it'll mean those same health insurance companies that no longer have to insure you are able to make billions of more dollars in the coming years in terms of so-called tax breaks, as it were. So, you look at that, bad enough. Even further, there's a third part to what's going on with the shutdown. And that's why I say we have to understand this as a part of bulldozing opposition to their entire agenda. And that is what you hear when you see the letter CR or hear the term continuing resolution. That's what that means is what you saw in the one big beautiful bill, which was healthcare, the tax cuts. That was not all. with the budget. In fact, the Republicans have been trying to cut every single other program that actually helps working class people, but they couldn't figure out exactly how to do it by the deadline. So in addition to locking in, kicking 15 million people off of healthcare, in addition to locking in $1 trillion tax break for the richest people and the richest corporations, including healthcare corporations, they also want to make sure that the funding for all other programs in the government remains level, for the next few months until they can figure out how to cut it even more. But here's the thing about that. Sounds good, right? Oh, well, it's just the same amount of money. Well, as we all know from our everyday finances, the things that cost a certain amount last year don't cost the same amount next year. So by keeping the funding the same, it actually is a cut. Because what happens is the cost of providing the service goes up. So if you have the same amount of money, you can't provide the same amount of services. And then if you think that a lot of these services people are getting, are in a worse situation because of inflation in the economy, they actually have to serve a broader group of people, which means that something that was already stretched thin is stretched thinner. So keeping the funding the same is actually an effective cut. So again, the shutdown is about essentially this. The Republican platform, which is to make the rich richer, the poor poorer, and keep the rest of us barely keeping our head above water. They're trying to bulldoze any opposition and use the shutdown to lock that in. And when I say the situation for people in this country, to make the rich rich, the poor poor, and the rest of us treading water, essentially, the situation is extremely dire. And we just have to note that at the outset. I mean, you've got anywhere between 18% and 33% of the population living in poverty, depending on how you measure it with the Census Bureau Household Pulse survey. You have well over 100 million people, 50 some odd million people, I have the stat there on the screen, you can see it, that are having at least some trouble making ends meet week to week. By the way, 43 million are finding it very difficult to make ends meet week to week. So think about that, 18 to 33% of the country, essentially between a fifth and a third of the country living in poverty. You have, almost the entirety of the workforce, when you look at that number of people struggling to make it week to week, or are struggling to make it week to week. I mean, this is a dire circumstance. That is what this plan that the Republicans are pushing is about, is actually making those numbers worse. And part of the reason I wanted to quote those numbers, and the fact that it's going to get worse, is those numbers come from the Household Pulse survey of the Census Bureau. And guess what Trump did to that? Well, he ended the collection of those statistics. I wonder why. So when you look at what's happening, that's the reality. The shutdown is being pushed to make the rich richer, the poor poorer, and keep the rest of us barely keeping our head above water. Now, why are they pushing the shutdown so aggressively on Trump's end? Because you would think, hey, do I really want to be the person seen coming up before an election as someone whose main issue was kicking 15 million people off of healthcare, and I wasn't really willing to make a deal to keep at least some of them on healthcare? Like, why would I do that? Do I really want to be the person who's known as shutting down the government, and ruining people's lives from federal workers, and shutting down services and all the other problems that causes, coming into an election? Do I want to be that person? It sounds bad. I don't want that. You'd think that the PR aspect of it. Well, the reality is the Republicans basically think the Democrats will fold. And they ultimately feel that they're going to be able to bulldoze the Democratic Party opposition, and then they'll be able to lock this in, and there's really nothing people will be able to do. And since they've crushed the Democrats, people won't turn to the Democrats in the election, because why vote for somebody who hasn't been able to offer any sort of opposition? Now, you might think, hey, that sounds like a pretty big risk. I mean, for the Democrats, feels like great issue, right? Like, they're going to fight hard. Well, why is it that Trump and Johnson and Thune may think the Democrats might just roll over on them? Well, we've got a few clips here from just before the shutdown started about the Democrats, Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer, their leaders in Congress, talking about their opposition to a shutdown and how hard they were fighting. Let's roll that clip.
So we hope and expect that Republicans will do the right thing. And if they don't, we're going to make clear to the American why they are playing games as it relates to the swearing in of Rep-elect Grijalva.
Is there anything you can do to stop it as in Congress?
Yes. First, we will fight it in the courts along with, people who will file suits. But second, I would hope, Kristen, that some of our Republican colleagues, seeing I know they're loyal to Trump and does whatever he wants, but This is so far stepping over the line that I'd hope some of them would join us in legislation to prevent it from happening. We have such a proposal. I'm part of it. Hakeem and I sent a letter in late July. We demanded, actually, to them, we demanded that they sit down with us because we needed to work this out in a bipartisan way. And let me
They sent a letter. That's tough. And I should clarify now that I remember that second Chuck Schumer clip is about what they would do about the National Guard. So essentially nothing, hoping that they will come to the table. And that first clip, of course, referring to the inability to the fact that they're not swearing in a Democrat who won a special election so they could do a number of different things, including address this issue with the Epstein files. So on all the critical important issues, the Democrats there saying that the most they're going to do is hope for the best, introduce legislation that will fail, or send a letter, whether it's the shutdown, the National Guard, or Epstein. So no wonder the Trump administration is thinking, hey, why don't we just go for this? Because are these people really going to ride out the anger of people in this country about the shutdown of the government and all the ripple effects? Probably not. They'll probably just roll over, which will make it even easier for us to beat them in the midterms, because why vote for somebody who's shown you that all they're going to do is hope for the best and write a letter? And we can't forget, really, that the Democrats are part of the reason that we are here in the first place. Because when they had control of the White House in the start of Biden's administration, they had control of the Senate, they had control of the House. In the start of the Obama administration, they had control of the Senate, they had control of the House, they had control of the White House. And in both those scenarios, one relatively recently in 2020, they were unwilling to use that power to pass legislation that could actually meet the scale of the problems being faced by the working class in this country, to resolve these issues, to not leave them out there to be exploited by Trump and others who are saying about their grievances. Instead of being worried about big businesses, you should be worried about immigrants, even though it's the big businesses that are responsible for the inflation that's destroying your basic livelihood. To misdirect people's anger at the fact that the government seems to be working totally inefficiently because the Democrats failed to fund critical services, so they can't actually operate in a way that makes sense. That our cities are falling down because they failed to actually advocate for them, even though they represent most of them. I mean, they've had the power. They failed to use the power. I mean, you can even see how Trump and the Republicans are using the power. They failed to even do that. I mean, the Senate makes its own rules. They can more or less do whatever they want to do. But when Democrats have control of the Senate, they say, well, we got to go with the parliamentarian and all these other things, and they don't do anything. The Republicans just do whatever they want to do. So part of why we are here in the first place is because the Trump movement has been tremendously empowered by the inability of the Democratic Party to actually push policies that a significant amount of the country actually support, like having health care for all people, like addressing the economy in a way that holds the biggest businesses and the richest people accountable from taxes and other different things like that. They've just failed to do it. They've allowed others to exploit it. Now we're in a place where the right wing is in pole position in the entire political system, and they are using that position aggressively to try to bulldoze any opposition and push things through, and the Democrats have no idea how to fight back. And even when their own supporters are crying for them to take on a more aggressive form of pushback to start to address these issues more effectively, I mean, you can see huge majorities of people in the Democrats now, saying that they want some form of socialism, that the Democrats need to push against capitalism, that they need to address these utilities and these banks and these billionaires and really bring them to task for the social crimes that they're committing on society, where people are dying from preventable diseases because they don't have health care, where they're dying because of poverty, where they're dying because of homelessness, to just end this dictatorship of these ultra rich people who would rather have, totally treatable, fixable problems move forward, even though it would cost them nothing, just because they'd rather have the heated Olympic-size pool in their giant mansion, or their third giant mansion, as opposed to the regular Olympic-size pool. Like, that's the level of greed that we see from people, and the Democrats won't stop it. And we see that the voters are sort of taking it into their own hands. And that's why we can see people like Zohran Mamdani, who may become the mayor of New York. And of course, he calls himself a democratic socialist. He's saying he's going to address issues of affordability, from rent to transportation to food, all these critically important things that all people want to see addressed. Certainly Democrats want to see addressed more aggressively. But then you look at how someone like Hakeem Jeffries responds to someone like Mamdani, who he's actually refused to endorse.
Leader, where do you land on this mayoral race in New York, and in particular on Mamdani? who is clearly now the front runner in this situation, won the primary. You have not publicly come out endorsed him yet. And I'm curious what you're thinking.
Well, he ran a strong race in the primary, obviously, relentlessly focused on affordability, which is a big problem, of course, here in New York City, along with every other part of the United States of America. And he outworked the opposition. He outmessaged the opposition and outorganized the opposition. But now during the general election, of course, he's going to have to demonstrate to a broader electorate, including in many of the neighborhoods that I represent in Brooklyn, that his ideas can actually be put into reality. And that's, the conversation that he's having with me and having with people who are community leaders and residents in the 8th Congressional District I serve.
And that sounds like you're not convinced then yet.
No, well, we had one initial conversation. It was a constructive and candid conversation. It was centered around the community. And in that conversation, he indicated he'd like my help in putting together additional meetings with members of the congressional delegation, as well as leaders in many of the communities that I represent in neighborhoods like East New York and Brownsville, Canarsie, some of the more lower income working class neighborhoods that I may serve. I agreed to do that. That meeting is being put into motion right now.
Leader, where do you land on this mayoral race in New York, and in particular on...
Well, you can see there, a dog whistle from Hakeem Jeffries saying that, in central Brooklyn, where he represents, that there are now more questions for Mamdani to answer, because people there must be wondering about him or whether or not his platform is something that they would want to embrace. And he's implying, of course, that black people would not support someone who labels themselves a democratic socialist. And he's implying that in the primary of New York City, that was in fact the impact of the vote, that people did not vote for Mamdani in the district he represents. Well, President Obama's former Svengali, David Axelrod, was asked about this and other things and noted this point.
By the way, he carried Hakeem Jeffries' district 2-1.
Well, can we actually play that again?
By the way, he carried Hakeem Jeffries' district 2-1.
Well, carried Hakeem Jeffries' district 2-1. So you can see here, obviously the Democrats, they're sending letters. They're talking about they're going to pass bills. They're lying about, even in their own districts, what the policies of the people who vote for them actually support and want to see them fight for. So I think you could pretty much conclude from that, and let's see what happens with the shutdown. Let's hope that somehow the Republicans are the ones who fold and that we find a way to keep 15 million people from getting kicked off of healthcare. But you can see, I think, pretty clearly why the Republican leadership has decided to roll the dice and think that they can bulldoze the Democratic administration. So we'll have to see what happens with this shutdown. Hopefully it goes a different way. I don't want to be too cynical about it, but I think I have to note here as we start to close that the only thing I think average, everyday working class people who are struggling to make it can conclude from this is that you cannot rely on either the Democrats or the Republicans to solve the problems that are making it more difficult for you to live and to meet your ends meet day to day. The only way that you're going to find any salvation is amongst yourselves and your fellow coworkers, friends, neighbors, loved ones coming together and bringing together a collective movement that can actually push for the salvation of working class people and to overturn this unbelievable dictatorship of billionaires and bankers and corporate heads that obviously just want to destroy everyone else's lives for their own profit. So we'll continue to follow this. We'll continue to follow the shutdown. We'll continue to follow all the issues that we talked about here today. That's going to bring us to a close here on the Freedom Side on Breakthrough News. Just want to remind people before we go, please, 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 if you can, go to patreon.com/breakthrough news. That's patreon.com/breakthrough news and become a member. And for those who might be wondering, because we asked people to become members in order for me to get on Instagram by the end of the month. And this is the second day of October, but it's basically the end of September. I have to let you know, much to my chagrin, you all have succeeded. You all have crossed the threshold that requires me to create an Instagram account. I'm procrastinating, but we will be revealing the Instagram account to you in the coming days and on next week's show. So shout out to everybody who, put a gun to my head over establishing an Instagram account. You succeeded against all odds. But thank you so much for your patronage. Thanks to all our other patrons. You are also great. You didn't want to ruin my life by forcing me to get an Instagram before you patronized us, but that's okay. Whatever it takes, we're here to do it, to bring you all of the important stories that you have come to love from Breakthrough News. So that's going to do it for us here today on the Freedom Side. For myself, for Rania Khalek, who's out this week, for our whole Breakthrough News team, we will see you next time.